Hi, welcome to Church for Skeptics. Dan Arsenault here, and we're talking about Darwinian evolution. I've gotten several videos up just talking about this, discussing what I call the there is no God at all theory. And that's why I think it's important. I think that the Genesis account of creation is a much better explanation. Of course, if it's true, it's the much better explanation. But even that, it's just a much better explanation of what we see. What do you think of? What do you think about when I say evolution? Probably what I would think about generally is change over time. Certainly that's true. But specifically regarding Darwinian evolution, change over time is about mutations. The environment does change sometimes, gradually and sometimes suddenly. But we're really talking about genetic mutations in reproduction. They say between 200 and 300 mutations are passed on from every human that reproduces. So, I mean, that's puzzling a little bit and a little bit scary maybe. So mutations would change over time. The second thing that we would think about normally would be, we call it natural selection. So what it means is that that nature itself it both nurtures and kills living forms. Different environments, I'm reading my notes a lot just to try to get this right. Different environments are differently helpful and differently dangerous to different kinds of life forms. We're not going to, if we go to the North Pole with no protection, we're going to die. That kind of thing. Unless we grew a lot of fur. So to review what we've come for this far is, here's my big point so far. Neither of those things, natural selection nor mutations, neither of those things explain Darwinian evolution, because Darwinian evolution is something else. It is, number one, common descent, which means that all life forms evolved, a change over time, through mutations, genetic changes, starting with one simple living life form, a protoplasm, Darwin thought, or some living cell, an organism, that just randomly came into existence, and then as it changed over time, mutated, things got, here's the second part, more simple to more and more and more complex as those changes were preserved via natural selection. And it's a little misleading to say that, even from my position, because when we start talking about from simple to complex, which we're going to use a lot today, we're really talking about the simplest life form has 500,000, and they call them nucleotides, which is just a genetic letter, A, D, C, F, or is there a G in there somewhere? 500,000, the simplest. Human beings have 3 billion nucleotides, genetic letters. Now, if you want to try to see the difference between 500,000 or even 500 million and 3 billion, do the math, and it's astronomical. There are a lot of good illustrations that you can find for that. But my point is, here's my case. Mutations and natural selections do the opposite. And this is if you get this, you get at least my case. Genetic mutations and natural selection produce the opposite of Darwinian evolution. We could call it devolution. And it's like, what really happens is like the most basic scientific principle, which is, I'm going to call it genetic entropy for this program here. Really what is the second law of thermodynamics, that everything tends to go simple, not complex. I think the biblical answer for that is the fall of man, or we could call it original sin. If you want to read this, read Romans chapter 8, verse 18 and following, where it talks about, and here's the Bible word for the second law of thermodynamics. It's called corruption in decaying, the decay of corruption. Everything, and of course Paul writes this in Romans 8, I think by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, that the whole world, the universe, is decaying. It's going from complex to simple, not simple to complex. I think that's what we see in nature itself. And I think that's the attribution for that is the fall of man. And here's the theology behind it. God created the universe good. He created it complete. And then as mankind separated from God by our own choice, then, and I know there's a lot of work that could be done and cases that could be made for that. And that's not what we're doing today. So as man separated, the universe fell too, in the sense that God separated himself by our choice. Yeah, just do it on your own. Okay, but here's the universe doing it more on its own, not completely, of course. That would be total train wreck. Anyway, you can see the decline since then, what the Bible says, the corruption or decay. So, I'm going to posit a couple things here. Number one, I'm going to posit that an accumulation, adding up mutations, one gets preserved, then more mutations add to that, more to that, more to that. An accumulation of mutations genetically cannot, now watch this, cannot create an accumulation of more genetic information. Now that's the heart of Darwinian evolution. You get one genetic change that is preserved, and then others add to that, and so you go from simple to complex. Dr. Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, calls it Mount Improbable. We're climbing up the mountain from simple to complex, and it's very improbable unless you go to the backside. And it's a gradual ascent, of course, one genetic mutation that is positive after another. My claim today is that's impossible. It's not just improbable, it's impossible because of what the nature of mutations are. The second thing I want to say today is that the most well-known, scientifically, the most well-known mutations, we know a lot about those things now, a lot more than Dr. Darwin did, they are lauded as celebrities, if you want to call them that, for Darwinian evolution. And they are at best lucky, broken things. They are not an accumulation of genetic information. In other words, you can't go from simple to complex via mutations, which are genetic mistakes. And the very idea of saying it's a mistake, which most scientists would say that, implies design, that here's the way God made it, now something's broken as a result of some kind of calamity. Let me give you a list here of some helpful, we manufacture these mutations on our own. We call them GMOs, and a lot of people think that the GMOs are generally really bad for us as humans, and that very well may be true. Most people probably think that, but let me give you a few examples of they produce some advantage, but they're all breaking things, okay? Scientists have enabled plants, crops, to dwarf themselves. They don't grow as tall or as heavy as previous crops, and the reason they want to do that is so that they don't fall over with weight once they get full of grain. And it makes it a lot easier to harvest those things. Another one would be non-shattering pods. That's a GMO. And they have produced that so that the pods don't break too early and spill on the ground, and then you can't harvest them. So it's all about the harvest, which is all about the money. There is a low phytate corn that has been produced mutatively, let's say, and the reason for it is cows can eat it better than we can. And so here again, follow the, you got it, money. New colors of flowers can be produced, but it's always by breaking something. Some color is left out, and new flowers are produced with new colors, and they're certainly beautiful and advantageous to our eyes, but it's not more information, it's less. I guess from a scientific standpoint, the number one at least in genetic labs, especially with students, the number one experiments have to do with fruit flies. It's a favorite subject, and the reason is they can induce those fruit flies with lots and lots of chemical mutations and radiation causing mutations, and they produce lots. And this is, I'm talking about for a lot of years now, they produced a lot of really weird flies. And guess what? They're all still flies. There's no genetic information added. They just get more and more weird. And there's no evidence. How does that, producing a lot of weird flies, and this is what I'm going to keep saying again, how does that relate to or point to or explain common descent, that we all came from one common ancestor? Well, it doesn't. How does that explain going from simple to complex? Everything that we can do to mutate, it breaks something. Sometimes those breaks are a little bit advantageous, but it has nothing to do with going from simple to complex via natural selection and genetic mutations. That's my point here. I'll give you one last idea. In 1988, Michigan State University founded 12 separate cultures of the bacteria E. coli. And those microbes, this is going to get a little tedious, but you'll get the point, and this is the last thing I want to say. Those microbes feed on, let's call it eat, they digest, so they must be eating two things: glucose, sugar, and citrate. The problem with those bacteria, E. coli bacteria, is they ingest a lot more glucose than they do citrate, especially if oxygen is present, and in most cases, oxygen and bacteria go together. Now, if the oxygen is absent, completely absent, one form in one way or another, then the citrate is they like to eat the citrate. But the problem is, once you run out of glucose, they cannot multiply. They can't grow. They can't thrive in that position. They can't do that. So E. coli bacteria reproduce really fast, which is a good reason to have them in a lab. So fast, as a matter of fact, that the expectation was, now watch this, if evolution is working like we thought it would, then these bacteria would evolve a way to uptake, and digest citrate. And by the way, it already could do that, but not very well, and especially the presence of oxygen. So they wanted it to evolve to do that. After 20 years, and lots of, actually 44,000 generations, that's about equivalent, on evolutionary terms, of about 1 million years of human reproduction. So 44,000 in the lab got nothing. So they switched to a computer program. I've got it down here someplace. It is called Avida. So that's the new computer-generated program here for this. And announcement finally came after 31,500 generations of reproduction. One of those 12 strains of E. coli bacteria mutated to the point that they could then uptake citrate in the environment of oxygen. Voila. So how does this point to Darwinian evolution, which is not mutations and mutations? That's what we're talking about. How does this announcement and remarkable accomplishment, so that you can get E. coli to eat citrate in the presence of oxygen, how does that point to common descent, that we all came from one single living cell? And how does that point to go from simple to complex, which is obviously necessary for Darwinian evolution to take place? And the answer is it doesn't. Let me give you 4 quick statements and a conclusion. E. coli already, before the mutations, could already digest citrate if there was no oxygen was being involved. They had because it had a little switch. We actually call it a transporter, but it's really a switch. So sometimes the switch is on to allow the bacteria to take in citrate. Sometimes the switch is off. When the oxygen was present, the switch is off, so it couldn't do it. It couldn't eat the citrate and digest it. Okay, so that I actually gave you number 1 and number 2. Number 3, the mutation in question broke the switch. As the E. coli finally reproduced after 31,500 generations, as it reproduced the on switch instead of the off switch. In other words, it broke the switch that kept the E. coli from taking in citrate and digesting it in the presence of oxygen. The off switch was broken. Now, same question. How does this point to common descent and simple to complex? It doesn't. Not in the least it doesn't. If God has not, look, if you're my age, in our own intestines, we have 30 to 40,000 mutations because we've reproduced our own cells for 70 years now. Evolution is going to kill us. If God does not put a time limit on the human species, which I'm convinced he has, we call it the second coming. If God has not put a time limit on that genetic entropy, we would all be extinct and we all would go extinct. But I think God created good. He created it complete. We have devolved and are devolving slowly but surely. But God put a stop. God will put a stop to it. I recommend a book to you. Dr. John Sanford, who is a geneticist, wrote a book called Genetic Entropy. I hope you'll get that book. You can find it. And if you're interested in this and really finding out the skinny on Darwinian evolution, it just doesn't work. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.